Hey, Changemaker! Welcome to Rethink Social Change Podcast, a show dedicated to helping social change practitioners improve the way they make change happen to achieve tangible and sustained impact. I'm your host, Ratiba Sharif. I've worked with some of the world's leading social change organizations for more than 2 decades on 4 continents to help them design better projects, learn from them, and measure their results. Using Rethink Social Change cards, I will challenge changemakers like yourself to share their experience on what worked, what didn't, and why, in a very unique way. I will shuffle the deck of 54 Rethink Social Change cards and randomly draw 4 cards that will guide our conversation. So if you're ready for unscripted, jargon-free stories from the field, let's dive into today's episode. He's navigated the complex landscape of international development for close to 2 decades, designing and measuring the results of social change. Jérôme Helfft is a senior consultant at INOMER. Not just an evaluation expert, he's really a storyteller of impact in fields ranging from peacebuilding to governance, but also migration, poverty reduction, and more recently, science, technology, and innovation. With 50 evaluation and research studies under his belt, Jerôme skillfully uses both qualitative and quantitative methods to unpack and understand projects implemented across Africa. He recently worked on evaluations or studies for the Human Development Innovation Fund of UNDP, a technology needs assessment in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the UNESCO Government of Flanders Trust Fund for the support of UNESCO's activities in the field of science. Let's see where today's cards will take our conversation. Let's bring him in. Hi, Jérôme. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Ratiba. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. All right, so we are going to be drawing some cards, and let's see where these cards take us. I did a short guest intro just before you joined me, and what have you been working on recently? Anything exciting?
I've been working with a consultancy based in Paris called INOMER, and it's a company that is specialized in evaluation and innovation. So lately, in the past 2 years, I've been working with a UN agency, a World Bank, to do evaluation of the program and to assess research institutes and also evaluate programs
Yep.
related to innovation, related to STI policies at the national level.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So I got some cards here, and I'm gonna show you. I'm just gonna draw another card that I'll bring out into the conversation later on. I won't give it to you to show you right now, but let's see that. Okay. All right. So your cards are, let's see, the historical context. Okay. So this is talking about historical narratives, significant events, things like that. Change at individual level. So when we try to bring about change at individual level in terms of knowledge, skills, attitudes, behaviors, things like that. And the last one is efficiency. Is it efficient? Okay, so you can speak to the 3 cards. If an idea starts to emerge, you can use just 2 cards to focus on based on experience, and then we'll see how it advances, and we can add other cards into the process.
Okay.
Any thoughts that does this trigger any thoughts? Does it remind you of any project that you worked on,
Yeah,
evaluation
actually,
that you conducted?
those 3 concepts actually relate a lot with the work I've been doing related to designing projects and programs related to evaluation of this program, because efficiency is one of the criteria we commonly use. It's like quite common to use that criterion for evaluation of programs. And individual change relates to especially the work have done at Search for Common Ground when it came to social change and also individual change, like trying to change people's attitude and behavior and knowledge towards specific issues like of governance, democracy, etc. So there's a lot of things that pops up in my mind related to like past work. Yeah, no, historical context is it's something that it's quite important to do in a social change program in terms of at the design phase of these programs. That's something like it's quite important to have people working on design of programs that have a deep knowledge of historical context in the country they want to put in place an intervention. So this is something that is used sometimes a little bit too quickly because we tend to rely on the knowledge of people in the field and some people in the field, but sometimes it requires also like to have a broader view of the historical context to understand like recent events and especially understand like the interactions between different stakeholders that we want to work with. And I think it's really it's really something that needs proper time to and proper documentation. The problem is that we don't have time in general, and we don't have like necessarily
Yeah.
it's a huge effort if you want to do this properly, like just to document the historical context. So I think it can be a trap to be stuck in in that phase, like rethinking too much at the design phase of a program. But it's very, I think it's quite important, especially working in peace building context, because you need to have that a good understanding of the like
Perspective.
events and what caused these events, like to really get into the real relevant root causes of those events. You
Yeah.
wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think yeah, no, it's fine. Just perspective. I remember that in peace building, understanding those narratives that are critical to the project or the issue that you're trying to address is important. Otherwise, there's so much to work on, and you could get overwhelmed. But like understanding what are the narratives that are really key that I need to work on is important. But you're right, often we don't have time. The design phases of a project are short. They're in some organizations they're participatory, in others they're not as participatory.
Mhm.
And so and also, when thinking about the project cycle loop, the lack of we don't use as well as we could evaluations of the previous projects in the same context. It comes back again to the use of evaluation, especially the final evaluations, to really inform new programming. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's a question of timing, they just don't get there on time, or they were not set up to be utilization focused writ large, not within the program, but within the larger context in that country. I don't know what it is, but there's a missing link between past evaluations and new project design. I
Yeah, no,
find as
absolutely.
well.
That's something I've encountered quite almost, I would say, systematically, is that the use of evaluation in general is quite disappointing, is quite low. And what happens a lot is that even though, which is not the case all the time, which is like pretty rare, even though like the main stakeholders, like people in charge of implementing managing the program and the key stakeholders, even though they want to use, they think they give importance to the evaluation and its findings. Even in that case, they not necessarily have the time to use and to reflect on the evaluation. So because what happened is that people either there's a second phase of the program after the evaluation, and they pretty much have to continue like to avoid any break between like the two phases. So it's pretty much like already set in stone, or it's it's the end of the project and that's it. And it's pretty rare that people would use that evaluation to design similar programs later on. So it's the way we like the development organization are working. It's difficult to have that period of time where you can actually reflect between two phases of a program, or or sometimes there's too much time between similar programs that could use each other's, that use previous results of an evaluation. So that's something that I've
Yeah.
faced very, very often, quite a lot. Totally agree with that.
Yeah, and that's why maybe approaches like Michael Quinn Patton's developmental evaluation, where evaluation is embedded within the implementation of the program, where you're actually
Yes.
learning as you go along as change emerges, and you adapt to the context, etc. Maybe that has more impact on use of information that's emerging, of knowledge that's emerging about the program, about the context, about how the different participants, beneficiaries, whatever you call them, are interacting with the project as they're being exposed to them, right? Because especially in these kind of contexts, who you are and how you do things is as important as what you do
Yeah.
in social change.
Yeah. Yes. It's like also like structurally, it's hard like to have this, this like a smooth feeding of the information findings of the evaluation into that process, because of the turnover of people. Like it's something also that even in like big organizations, they move on to other positions. They move on to like other posts, even if they stay within the organization, and that's something also that make it a little bit difficult to use that. But I agree with you. I rarely saw like a proper settings where you have like user-based design evaluation. Sometimes they mention the principle of we're going to do this, and they try to implement according to patterns guidelines, but it's in reality then it becomes like just wishful thinking.
Yeah, I just because I was gonna say maybe they're afraid. I'm just thinking out loud here. Maybe they're afraid of what they'll see, and it brought me to efficiency. And it's on there. It says optimal use of resources, right? And so
Yeah.
maybe I'm thinking that maybe there's this fear of failure just generally, right? But I'm more into a proponent of like fail fast, do it, try, because we don't control anything. We have a vision for a change, for a project, of how it will be, implemented, how it's going to be deployed, etc., and what possible changes will arise. But really, we know nothing. We don't control the situation. When COVID, no one was expecting COVID, and all of a sudden, everything stopped. And that we hadn't planned, of course. I'm sure all project at the time didn't have that in their risks and assumptions, that there'll be a world pandemic where we'd have to stop. So
Yeah.
maybe sometimes we're afraid of saying that we failed. We tried something, we didn't get it right. It wasn't, because it's linked to use of resources. And I'm thinking, because you want to make sure that you get that other projects are funded within your organization in the country, but then for the organization in other countries as well. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud. Is that why evaluation is not really used as it should be? It's used more as a kind of checks and balances rather than learning for learning purposes.
Yeah, I think it's
Any
like
thoughts on that?
evaluation is a key process in learning, especially when it deals with a social change program, or we've mentioned also like peace building program earlier. And the 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 the, the tricky thing with the efficient criterion is that you know you have like a different timelines in terms of what you expect from a program to be able to do with a certain amount of resources. And I think it's like many donors tend to be a little bit like looking for a magic bullet. And you can't have like the same approach, the same way of monitoring and evaluating programs when it comes to development versus humanitarian and things that you want to see, like if things that work or not. Does that program work or not? Uh, I think it can be quite dangerous because sometimes you invest money and you don't get the result. And for instance, in peace building, you have to think differently. You have as some donors, just a few donors, like more people inside some like donor organization. They have, they advise more that you have to think about portfolio rather than like a specific program, especially in terms of
Interesting.
efficiency. And because it's in peace building, you're gonna have like things that are not going to work, even if they work in different contexts, in in a similar context, and you try this and it doesn't give the same result because like the you have so many factors that can like influence the
The
result and
variables are different.
the implementation. So you have to think in more in terms of portfolio, and the same way for efficiency. You'll provide resources, and you won't look at efficiency the same way like by individual program, but more at a portfolio in a specific region or country, and look at that way, because there will be programs that will not carry out a lot of impact, and there will be programs that will be and it's just sometimes you just don't see the connections between different interventions if they happens at in the same time window. So I think it's a quite an interesting perspective for me, like to think about a portfolio of programs and projects, rather than like trying to evaluate things individually.
Yep. Yeah, because it's a very interesting way of seeing it, because the portfolio assumes that you're addressing the problem in different ways.
Yes.
If you say portfolio, then you're working at macro level, meso level, micro level, individual change. So there are different ways to address a problem, which is quite interesting, and it puts less of the it's not as forceful, and gives more space for people to do real work and adapt to the changing context. They're not as attached to the compliance measures for that specific program,
Yeah.
for that
Yeah.
specific project, but like
And
see it
also
as
in a
yeah.
multi-phase program, you're gonna have, if you take like sometimes like the analysis, the efficiency analysis from a financial point of view, sometimes in some programs, especially related to policy change, you will have to invest if they're not strong enough at the beginning of the project. You will have to invest in relationship building with different institutions and policymakers, etc., and like different actors that can influence like a policy. So this part is like you have to make some investment at beginning, onset at the programs that will run for a long time, and that you expect at the end of like several cycles, maybe you'll get the change that you expect. But this is, and if you take the efficiency criterion the way we use it, you might think that okay, the benefits versus the cost is not worth it. So we're going to discontinue this program. But in fact, it's an important phase, like to build relationship. Sometimes it doesn't cost much, but sometimes you have like to invest more over
Yeah.
time. And in terms of HR, that's the real cost that comes to build relationship. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why like
So
efficiency for me is a little bit sometimes a little bit tricky. I mean, it's for instance, like programs that used to be that are funded by FCO, they systematically ask for value for money analysis. And but I think it's the way also you can analyze this money for value and take enough perspective in a like a longer timeline. I think it's hopefully like the donors don't take this to the letter, I would say.
yeah. And I think it's also about agreeing with the donor, what does efficiency mean for you in this
Yeah,
context with this kind of project?
yeah.
Because
Same question
for
goes
us,
with the
efficiency,
impact.
exactly, what does impact mean? I remember, some of the work that's been done, for example, at Search for Common Ground, using like doing track through diplomacy and things like that. Just getting people around the table was actually
Yeah,
a
it's already
result.
results.
These people
Yeah, it
never
can be a
spoke to each other. And so
yes.
the process of getting them around the table is where the work is. That they get to the table, you control nothing, right? Once they get into the table, yeah, around the table, you control nothing. So for us, it's defining efficiency, defining impact, defining results with the donor is critical. Like sitting down and really talking about what it is that they're expecting for you to achieve within the timeline that you have, and then what you can really achieve. So that's interesting. Could we, Jérôme, could we speak a little bit about your experience of measuring, or I'm going to say measuring, and then I'll qualify it, individual change, right? Because it's always been hard to show change in these kind of social transformation projects, demonstrate change on a wide level, right? Across a very large sample. Beyond the surveys that we use, knowledge and attitude surveys, etc. Beyond that I have issues with. Beyond that, like the breadth. And when I introduced you, I talked about how you were interested in the stories of change, right? Storytelling about evaluations that actually tell us a story. The storytelling, the real interesting, nuanced perspective on individual change happens with case studies, with smaller samples. You pick some outliers maybe and say, okay, why did this person change? Why did this person not change? But it's very small. It's not something that you can apply across a sample of, say, a whole community or a whole region that you worked on. Could you speak a little bit to that? Some of the challenges and that you've encountered measuring individual
Yeah,
change,
I mean,
if you
one of the common things that I've noticed when it comes to measuring like understanding and measuring like a change of attitudes and knowledge and behavior is that there's a lot of limitation for, using survey for that, because you get like what is like the socially acceptable responses in terms of attitude. So people are not very authentic. And also you can measure some like attitude change, and they can be like validated, but we also tend to think that increases in acquiring certain knowledge then will change almost in a linear way your attitude, and then this attitude will bring about behavior change. And I think it's like, just to talk about measuring that, it's for me it's yeah, we don't look at other factors like locus of control in terms of behavior change, and like attitude is only one dimension. when it comes to behavior. There's like a lot of other factors that intervenes in that. And attitude is, to me, like the more, like in hindsight, it's like something that is not as important as we think. And yeah, knowing also that the way people report, like answer about their own attitude in questions that are can be like just socially acceptable responses on certain topics. It's quite obvious, and it doesn't that's something that is quite challenging. There's like from a more technical point of view, it's also quite hard when you have to measure small change in attitude. You need like a really big samples. Let's say, especially when you try like to have like a significant change in attitudes, like going from like 90% to 92%, or like it's almost impossible in terms of the means we have to have like the enough survey responses to have like statistically significant response. So that's one thing. I think the other, I truly believe that like measuring behavior, it's when you want like to generalize, you need like quantitative data, but the observation is quite the most important. If you really want to have something that is closer to the truth, like observation is very important. I think it's what is also quite fascinating about measuring attitude is I think like the most interesting results for me was doing like more qualitative work, like focus group discussions about behavior and attitude change. And I think one of the like very interesting one I did was actually with Search for Common Ground. We had like a de-radicalization, part of a de-radicalization program of the British government in Indonesia. And they were doing, life skills, conflict management training, and other type of training in prisons, in Indonesian prisons. And we had like a really interesting focus group that were well set up. And we took the time like to do this the right way. And it was very interesting like to understand how people like in prison with very little agency on their own, with the trainings and like some practices, they would like change their behavior towards first they would change their attitude towards like the sense of responsibility, and they would take some activities, some work like related to prison management itself, or like prisoners management. They would take responsibility. They would come forward and try to practice a few things, even though and it was very interesting to capture with their stories, to get with little details what they would behave and like what kind of activity, participating in group activities in the prisons, how they were they were using the skills they had. Even though in terms of attitude, the attitude also that they were explaining is that we actually didn't learn that much. These trainings were things that we already knew. And in fact, it's that's interesting because it's tricky. You can have a change of attitude that's like more objective from like a measurement point of view, and also the way they report on their own knowledge, acquiring knowledge. They had like this attitude of we knew already this. It was quite interesting to see the contrast between the two.
So the problem wasn't knowledge. Again, it's about understanding who it is that you're working with. The problem wasn't knowledge. They knew all along. The problem was what they did with that knowledge and how the attitudes they had, because something else was more important than the knowledge. Something else was swaying them. So it was
Yeah,
working maybe on that other thing as
yeah.
well.
And even
And
though they had that
it's
knowledge, it's like even though they were not completely, yeah, they didn't realize necessarily that they were like learning skills, but also like the fact that they realize that they had that knowledge, or they have this with them as something that can be useful. It triggers some change in their attitude. I think just the fact
yeah, yeah.
sometimes, even though they don't learn a lot in terms of knowledge, the fact that they go through this process, like this training and interaction with others, it triggers for them like, yeah, but in fact I have this knowledge. It's like a knowledge, that's something I can use in different situations. So even though they knew these basic things, or they pretend to knew, it's yeah, it gave the fact that they were put in that situation, like triggered like a change in attitude, and I thought it's quite interesting to observe.
Jérôme, in hearing you, I saw the importance. I can see the importance of qualitative tools to get more of the depth and understand better how change happens. Right? What are the obstacles to change, etc. And the card that I drew without you knowing is the push-pull factors. So here it says on the card the forces that drive away from or draw you to. So what's actually pushing and pulling in this the use of these? I'm showing you the other cards too. Why aren't we doing more qualitative, investing more into those tools if they tell us more in terms of depth and understanding? They bring that more. Why aren't we using more of that? What are the push and pull factors that affect that?
I think it's there's the first things that come to mind is that the like one of the pulling factor, I think, is that it requires like a lot of time, like to do qualitative work that's going to be very used. I think the way, like the practice, is that qualitative approach is associated like with cheap evaluation. You have to do something quick and for little money. And so we're going to go for, a few qualitative interviews, a few focus group, etc. And it's in general, unfortunately, that that's something in those evaluation, which are like quite very common, that you have like 3 months or even less to do like a quick evaluation at the end of a program. And so that you just want to do a little bit of qualitative. It's going to be quicker, it's going to be less money, and that's what it's associated with. Like, I think unfortunately it's associated with low quality. I think what would be interesting to do is probably evaluate less things, less programs, even though, and having some, because sometimes some donors can have like a long-term partnership with implementing organization. And especially when it comes like to, you give money to UN agencies, and they work with partners, like implementing partners, and etc. So sometimes they have like longer term, that you can have like longer term partnership. And in that case, you, again, having this idea of thinking about portfolio of programs rather than like specific programs, is instead of evaluating systematically, each program with low resources and doing bad, like very meaningless or not so useful evaluation for each program. It could be interesting to do more like evaluation that are like very solid research in it, almost like a research, and but with specific programs, or across like a topical, doing a topical evaluation, or even a meta evaluation.
Yeah.
And that's where qualitative work can be very interesting, like to go deep in those evaluation, and understanding better like the factors, especially when it deals with social changes. And I think the qualitative work is essential in understanding what brings social change. Of course, it doesn't mean that I mean, if you do those big evaluation, the quantitative part sometimes it's necessary to be quite important as well, if you want to, generalize, and especially like measuring certain type of impact. But in our line of work, in like more social change programs, it's quite complicated to get to.
Although I was going to say that although that I'm seeing actually great potential with AI. We've seen in the last 10 years quite a development in qualitative analysis software. So it's not so much,
Yeah,
again, I think, again, it's not so much that qualitative tools or focus group is kind of that like bad or quick and cheap kind of evaluation. It's actually the toughest because the
yeah,
analysis
I
process
agree.
is
Yeah,
much heavier than quantitative. You have to agree another moment of kind of thinking, sitting down, what is it that is important to us so you can label things correctly, etc. But so qualitative softwares have evolved quite a bit in the last 10, 15 years. And then you also have now AI, if used correctly, can really help kind of bring depth and bring back qualitative or narrative, right, feedback into the fore and give it an equal footing, so we can manage more data, because it's the tricky thing is we collect so much data in qualitative data, but we don't analyze all of it. Some
yeah,
of it is left to the side, which is where, so I'm seeing, I can hear that as being a pull factor, that it's not helping, but I think that with new technology, actually, we
yeah.
could
It could be
we
a
could
push
really
factor,
make a
absolutely.
headway in that.
Yeah, and you need also
I'm
like
looking at the
yes,
time.
yeah, sure, no problem. Yeah, no, no. I think it
So
requires like very skilled researchers to do proper like good qualitative work. It's something I think it's one of the it's really tough. You need like very good skills like within as you collect the data themselves, like during the collection process as well. You need to be very good at not just like
yeah.
accompanying the conversation, and it's without bias
Mm,
and getting the rich data. Otherwise, it requires skills. Honestly, it's very
yeah.
hard.
Oh yeah. A focus group facilitator is one of the toughest jobs, right?
Yeah,
It's
if you want to do
very
that well,
difficult
yes,
to
yeah,
to
yeah, absolutely.
it's very difficult. Okay, well, with these words, we're gonna close the conversation. Thank you so much for your time, for your insight, Jérôme,
Thank you.
for sharing some of your experience, some of your thoughts. I'll have to invite you again so we can talk about innovation a bit
Sure.
later down the down the line. Thanks a lot and be well.
Thanks to you. See you soon.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Rethink's Social Change Podcast. I hope you got a lot of value and actionable insights from today's show. Would love if you take a minute to leave us a review. And if you work on social change and are up for the challenge, reach out. And before you go, be sure to subscribe so you're the first to know when we release a new episode. Till then, be the change.